And we are now live, just so everybody knows.
Thank you. Okay, we'll call the Planning Commission to order this Wednesday, April 7th, 2021. If staff could call roll, please.
Sure. Mr. Guerrero,
Here.
Ms. Connie Coleman-Lackady,
Present.
Mr. Paul Wagaman,
Present.
Mr. Philip Combs,
Here.
Mr. Don Daniels,
Here.
Mr. Ryan Pearson, and Mr. Lynn Larson. I understood would be here tonight, but there's a possibility he's having technical problems because he has yet to get his iPad. He was just appointed on Monday night. And so if he wasn't able to get his phone to work, that may be what's going on.
All right.
I think I was missed or something for a second there. I'm here.
Yeah, I called on you, but maybe the internet went out or something. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm thanks.
How about Mr. Guerrero?
I think
Yep,
I called his name.
Okay.
Thank
Called
you.
the
I'm
first.
sorry. So you
Number
have,
one.
I
you
saw
have
him.
6 of your 7.
Okay, I saw him muted, so I didn't know if or he was just raising his hand where I couldn't see. So, all right, great. Thank you for everyone being here tonight. Before us, we have the minutes of March 24th, 2021. I'm looking for a motion.
I'll move that we accept the minutes as written.
Thank you, Mr. Wagaman. Appreciate it. We have a first. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Guerrero, beat you, Mr. Pearson. Mr. Guerrero, seconded. Do we have any comments, changes, concerns? Okay, so we have a first and a second. So all those in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, the minutes passed as written. Thank you. Other than the changes to the agenda that Ms. Spear has already told us, changing the shoreline restoration report prior to the comprehensive plan amendments, is there anything else changes?
No, Mr. Chair.
At this time, I'll open public comment. And do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
We do not, Mr. Chair.
All right, and if anyone's, I'll give a minute there. If anyone's on the line on YouTube or have access, would like to speak to fellow commissioners, this is your opportunity to share any information. Hearing or seeing none at this time, we will then close the public comment period. Tonight we have no public hearing and we have no unfinished business. So we'll move right along to new business, to the 2020 Shoreline Restoration Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Mr. Larson has joined you now, so he is in the meeting as well. Secondly, tonight is the annual process by which the Planning Commission is brought up to date by members of the community and staff as appropriate from the city regarding shoreline restoration activities that have gone on since last year. And this is the outcome of the adoption of the latest shoreline master program by the city and the accompanying shoreline restoration plan. Tonight we have Al Schmauder and Janet Spingath, and Ricky McGee from the community to provide a report to you. They're each going to be sharing some slides as far as I understand. And then we also have Public Works Engineering Director Paul Busich here to give you an update after they're finished regarding what's going on with city planning for some shoreline restoration work in the coming years. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Schmauder, and then maybe the rest will come along afterwards, but I defer to him to set up the order.
Yeah, can I interrupt real quickly? This is Ricky. I'm
Sure.
in charge of sharing the slides, but I don't see a share slide button on this Zoom interface.
Let's see. Let's try it like this. Can you do that now?
Got it. Thank you so much.
So Mr. Schmauder, take it away.
Here we go. Am I unmuted now, Tiffany?
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you. Members of the Planning Commission, thank you very much for allowing us to get on your busy agenda. My name's Al. I'm the Stewardship Chair for the Chambers Clover Watershed Council. And this is our second update to you. And we didn't achieve as much work as we would like to have done in the creek this year, possibly due to the pandemic. And we have these meetings now to look at successes of your restoration plan, identify any deficiencies, and then see if we need to make any adjustments. So although we didn't achieve as much as we wanted to, and Lakewood didn't spend as much money as maybe we could have gotten out of you to improve your streams, but I thought I would like to share with you what your neighbor has done just upstream from Lakewood at McCord Field. I don't know if many of you have seen this project. You better get your checkbook out if you want to compete with them. They spent $86 million last year. This project was to replace two 12-foot culverts which ran under the McCord Air Base. So this number one picture is kind of a large overview. The black pipes are pumping water from the one side of the runway, that's Clover Creek, back to the other side, so it could flow downstream into Lakewood. Let's see. You see this thing running through the middle. These are bridges, they call them. They're 6 foot wide individual bridges, and they put them in with cranes, laid them in after they took the old culverts out. And so this kind of gives you an overview. Let's try the next slide. And here's a little closer picture as they're coming. They've gotten under the runway now, and they're moving down toward the end of the creek. Let's see the next one, Ricky. This is the end of the pipe as they're approaching the end of it. And let's see the final one. Here is the picture almost finished as the creek comes out of their tunnel. The water in Lakewood went down. They started this project in August last year, and you had very little flows in the creek there in Lakewood. And then they stopped it completely one day, like the 10th of August, and the next day it zoomed up. So what they did is they pumped the water from Clover Creek all the way around this project, plus lowered it about 10 feet so that ground would be dry when they worked. Now, when they did that, they pumped out a chemical called PFAS. PFAS is the aqueous foam that they use to fight fires on planes. And now they found out that's very contaminated. It's not a good chemical, and it lives almost forever. So they pumped it out. They had to filter that water before they pushed it into the city of Lakewood. And this is, you probably know about this, but the city of the Lakewood Water District is now suing the federal government for over about $370 million to make up for the costs which the Lakewood Water District had to pay to keep this toxic out of their systems and in the future costs. So these are interesting things, didn't directly affect your shoreline, but they do affect the water that's flowing on the shorelines. So we looked, we look forward now in this coming year, as we all get our shots and we are able to meet with people, to work with Lakewood's master plan for Springbrook Park. We've got some input we'd like to provide. The Clover Creek runs right through it, and we'd hope we could give the architects some information that might help improve your plan. That's all I'm going to share with you tonight. And Janet Spingath will be following me. If you have any questions.
Doesn't look like it. So Janet, go ahead.
You're on mute, Dawn.
Okay,
Sorry.
wait till I see the slides.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Okay, hi there. I came last year to talk from the points of view of the American Lake Improvement Club and the Friends of Wahop Lake. So go ahead, Ricky, move ahead. So starting with Wahop, this is, what happened. So Wahop Lake was treated with alum last year to reduce or to get rid of the incredible blue-green algae bloom. And so you can see the sediment core there shows a gritty white layer on the top. The water was bright blue as a chemical reaction created those white flakes. So it was pulling the phosphorus out, binding it up into alum, and then they had to balance the pH. So that's what it looks like at the bottom. Okay, go ahead. So in June of 2020, Ricky and I went out and she helped me. We did a rake, what's called a rake sample. And basically that's just a basic, you're going to throw a rake in and you're going to pull it up at points along a transect line and hopefully get a good cross section of what's growing on the bottom of the lake. Go ahead. At the same time, in American Lake, this is what was growing at the bottom of it. So the variety of aquatic plants in the shallows, and you can see on the right-hand side, this is why aquatic vegetation, submerged aquatic vegetation is very important, because all that fuzzy stuff is providing habitat for invertebrates and it's providing different plant species. And so insect larvae, fish, all kinds of things use this vegetation that's at the bottom of lakes. Go ahead. So our rake sample revealed only one thing. This one blob came up. There was no vegetation growing at all. This is Ophrydium versatile, or really technically called a green jelly blob. Go ahead. So the Pierce County Health Department contacted Tetra Tech to identify what this was. And they said that this was protozoan colonies with varying densities of a single cell green algae, chlorella. The density of the internal algal defined the level of green color of colonies from very clear to almost green enough to appear only semi-transparent, but it's still very jelly-like. This is an indication that nitrogen is in excess available amount, leading to green algae production and limited by phosphorus availability. So it's not promoting blue greens. Next, please. So in June last year, last summer, the fishing was poor because the fish are just not there. I've contacted several fishermen. This is just, people that I sort of recruited from the Lakewood Life Facebook page. And they reported we're not catching anything. So next slide, please. And then birders from Audubon who like to stroll around. Again, this is, hearsay, but it's people what we stop on the walkway, just, hey, are you seeing anything? And they reported a noticeable drop in the numbers and variety of birds there at the lake. Go ahead. So it's not surprising when there's no vegetation that there wouldn't be anything for fish to eat or habitat for them. So in the future, I would just like to understand there's some other alternatives now that this ultrasonic buoys, if we need to treat the lake again, when the alum layer starts losing its effectiveness, we might want to consider non-chemical alternatives. So this is a ultrasonic buoy, and what it does, it's a system that monitors the growth of blue greens, and when it senses that they're starting to grow, it sends out ultrasonic waves that actually break apart the cell structure. So they never actually, they never bloom. Okay, next. There's another technology we might want to try. It's called nanobubble technology. And this is one that it creates nanobubbles of oxygen, which actually don't float. They sink down, and as they're going down, they attach to cells like algal cells and destroying them before they can grow in enough number to produce toxins. And go ahead. Okay, so the next steps is I would like this commission to consider viewing a virtual presentation about these future non-chemical treatment alternatives, just so that you can be informed about what's out there. You might want to make decisions. I think they're going to be very, very cost effective. So that's my update for Wahop Lake. And then we'll start on the American Lake shoreline. So last year, I talked to you about various things, wakeboarding, the invasive species, things like that. So we'll just continue from where I kind of left off last year. So the invasive aquatic weeds continue to be a threat. Now, we had a very successful Eurasian water milfoil treatment. Unfortunately, and I don't know if it's going to happen, but I just want you to be on notice that it's very common after we remove one species, we'll have what's called a species shift, and the ones that were latent down there will start taking over. And we have curly leaf pondweed in American Lake, and it's common to get rid of your Eurasian water milfoil only to see the curly leaf pondweed come back up. Okay, next. We're also finding increasing numbers of Asian invasive clams, which are on the left, and the Chinese mystery snails. These are, they're prolific reproducers, but the worst is yet to come. So let's go to the next one. Oh, also we have nutria in American Lake. This has been a problem for some homeowners on American Lake, Silcox Island, and the nutria have been spreading up to be around docks and willow trees, and they reproduce rapidly. They came from South America in the 40s. They were imported as a means for farmers all over America. Okay, from farmers all over America. Whoops, go back to be a farm crop for the fur industry, and the bottom kind of fell out of that for nutria, and so they basically let them go, and they prefer to live under the roots of trees, and they reproduce a lot, and they chew bark like beavers. They basically, chew all of the bark there you can see that they can reach. They also go up into homeowners' yards. This is a rhododendron on the right-hand side that they chomped, so he had to put a fence around it. We tried trapping them. We've called trappers. Trappers basically don't want anything to do with them. They can't get any money for them. And since they are an invasive species, you can't transport them. So on our lake, we've been sharing a nutria trap around. And if you catch one, we just basically baptize it for a few hours. And then they're very, very filthy. They carry rabies and all kinds of diseases. So it's not recommended that you even touch them. And so they become a nuisance, and people are complaining. They get under your docks, they chew up if you've got styrofoam, they chew up the docks, and the styrofoam comes out, floats to the shore, and they have little nests in there. Okay, next. Now, this is what we're really concerned about. This is the terrifying thing that's on its way to Washington State. These are zebra mussels. These came from the Ukraine originally, and they have there's nothing that eats them, and there's nothing that kills them. The Pacific Northwest right now is the only region that's not yet infested. Last year, I talked about getting maybe a portable boat inspection station from WDFW, but they needed all of them. They've sent them to the state borders, and they've intercepted one boat coming from Lake Mead that had them in the bilge, and then another one coming that was sold from I think a Michigan or Midwest company came over, and it had they're called Bellingers, the little larvae that are nearly microscopic. But this is what they do, and they do it very rapidly. So the picture on the left is beach, I think it's in Canada, it's at a lake, and it's just covered with these sharp shells. They're like razors. And you can see what they do to boats. You don't want to leave that in your lake because it quickly, rapidly clogs and grows. Okay, switch. So we, American Lake has some monitoring stations for the mussels on JBL and the shore. And we're going to be installing another station at the American Lake boat ramp in May. This is a very, very serious threat. We just learned that there was a whole lot of these mossballs that are sold in aquarium stores. They came over and they found, in Seattle, they found some, it was like PetSmart had them. They found 12 dead ones in a sample of 70. So they're around, they're coming. We had this little guy that I hear is Puddles, and he's actually trained to, he works at the state borders, and he stops and he smells them out, and he's very good at what he does. I've watched him in action, and he can find a mussel anywhere. So go ahead, next. So the city of Bellingham has boat inspections. They do this mostly because their water source is also a recreational lake. And they are successful at preventing infestations of their lakes. They've got a great program they would love to share with our city. They're very enthusiastic about it. They've got a history of how it started and what they started with. And I think that would be really interesting for you guys to see and hear from them. So next one. So in conclusion, I would like you to consider viewing a virtual presentation from the city of Bellingham about their successful boat inspection program. And I'd also urge you to consider enforcing the boat launch fee collection at American Lake Park to finance a boat inspection program to keep American Lake free from these invasives if we can. We may not be able to always get the mussels out, but we can sure find plants. They're a lot easier to see. Right now, I don't know if you guys are boaters, but it's very common to have a busy boat ramp, and very few people take time to pay the fee. It's just like, as soon as you see a spot, you zip in, dump your boat and go. So that's my report. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Janet in regard to what we just heard, her presentation? Seeing none. Mr. Combs, do you have a question? You're muted.
Yeah, first one's for Al, and I'm curious how much of the contamination that was in the water it finds its way or filters its way, or can it get into the lakes? And is there any concern there? And then Janet, if you don't mind just talking through the costs as you understand them, and for those two different alternatives for Wahop Lake, I think that it would be helpful to understand. I know we don't have a full cost analysis on it or anything, but I'm curious what these alternatives look like numbers wise as far as operating and I mean, it's good to stay ahead of this stuff. And so if we can avoid it, there's a cost savings typically there, because treating it is certainly more expensive than preventing it.
Yeah.
And if there is something with those two alternatives that are there, is there anything related to those that could potentially be harmful as well, or not good for the environment or the lake?
Okay. So I just did preliminary research. The cost of the buoys is, I think it's around for the whole thing. And so they provide software, they provide monitoring. Oh, who's talking? Al?
No, you're on. Go ahead, Janet.
Okay. So the cost of it is less than 100,000. So I think they said our lake, Wahop, is a good candidate because it doesn't have an inflow or outflow. It's about 9 feet deep. So that's probably going to be a good one for them to present to. I can't see that there's any, I can't imagine there would be any negative environmental from occasional ultrasound waves. But again, it would be something, if you want to look further into this, I can inform you. And the nano bubbles, Terry McNabb has that. He just came out with this is my new technology, and I don't have a price for that, but he's who treats runs our lake manager. He's our lake manager for American Lake. So he's somebody that it's easy to reach out to. I can find that information.
Great.
Love to.
Thank you, Janet. Appreciate it. And
Yeah.
Al, you're on there to the other part of Mr. Combs's question, if you have that answer.
Well, I can't tell you exactly how the quantities and what's not good and what's bad. I know that it was bad enough that McCord had to shut down a couple of their wells because it was too dangerous. Lakewood had a couple wells they were pumping, and it had in there, so they put in some filters, and they were able to successfully clean the water to meet water standards for the public. So I don't know if it's going to get any worse, or you got to talk to Mr. Randy Black to get the real facts on that, Mr. Combs.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Al. Any other questions for either Janet?
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Larson, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Apologize for being late.
No problem.
What's being done to marshal the homeowners around the lakes, especially American Lake, to be alert to these problems and also to consider being as a revenue source for the solution? There are a lot of boats on the lake that don't come and go on the boat ramps. And I just wondered how you were incorporating your work into including those residents.
So we have formed the Lake Management District, and we were paying our tax per lineal foot. Every homeowner along the shore does. The only way that we really have of informing is we have kind of a homeowners association website, and also I write a column every month in Lakeside Living magazine, and it's delivered to every shoreline owner on American and Bradley Lake. So in that, I try to inform them of things like the nutria, how to get rid of it, and what these shells are that you're seeing on your beach. So I've been getting good feedback. I'm starting to be like a go-to person. I get emails from people asking me plant questions and water questions, and I try to direct them in that. But we haven't stopped to think about, oh my gosh, I know that one thing we would really like to see would be a collection of the boat launch fees, and see that going to, because we're worried about the boats coming in and reinfesting our lake.
Great.
So if I can say one more thing, Mason County has an excellent signage programs that they made for their lake at Mason Lake. I sent pictures of them and sent them to Greg Vigran before he left. And I think if Lakewood wanted to do something that is effective, they could look to them for guidance. Their lake management district, they talk to one another. They're very well informed. Their lake, I don't know how they do it, but whenever we go over there, we work there in the summer removing invasive weeds, and they all seem to know what these weeds are. They can name them. So I'd like to see American Lake residents be as knowledgeable.
Great. Any other questions for Al, Janet?
This is Lynn. I've got a
Yes,
question for Al. Thinking of that per lineal foot charge.
I wanted to say it's quite.
Oh, go ahead, Al.
I live on Clover Creek, and think that might to help the creek as we go on.
My internet from Lake Powell, Arizona is kind of weak.
Yeah.
I didn't get your question.
Sorry, go ahead, Lynn, again. Maybe you can answer.
What was your question?
My question is, do you have or anticipate on Clover Creek having a similar taxation district so that the people who live along the creek contribute to its welfare, if you will?
I understood your question. That are we considering having a district, a creek protection district? Was that your question?
something
Yes.
like that. I just wonder if that's an idea that might float. No pun intended.
Well, I tell you, that's probably an excellent idea. But there's another issue that might be even bigger. We're concerned about the groundwater right now. I wasn't going to tell you about that right now, but we're sucking a lot of water out of our ground and sending it to Puget Sound through our sewer systems. And nobody is monitoring how much groundwater we have available for sustained usage. I'm working on that pretty hard to try to give you some better information. But what's happening is we're losing our stream flow farther up in Clover Creek. If we keep drinking as much water as we are and using it, you may not have any water to worry about in Lakewood. That's a sad thing to say, and it happens very, very slowly. So we want to try to get some better information monitoring our groundwater to see if you have something to protect someday. But I really love your idea, and we need some way to help repair. In Lakewood, you have about 4 or 5. You have 6 fish passages, and 4 of them plug up every year. And there's nobody to help clean them out. So I'm going to push Pierce County to try to hire somebody to be a steward of the watershed. And that would include Lakewood also. So, we've built fish ladders, we made man-made projects, and we have no maintenance. And that doesn't work, but we haven't spent any time at maintenance. So you got some very good questions, Lynn, and I'd like to maybe work with you on your thoughts in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Al. And seeing no additional questions for Al, Janet. Oh, Mr. Wegeman, go right ahead.
I do, Al. When I worked with Granny Black in the water district, I forget exactly what we were doing. We were talking about raising rates at that point in time. They were telling us that we're at the bottom of the aquifer, and there's water that's going out into the sound whether we use it or not. So I don't understand everything you're saying about running out of water. What does that mean?
Well, you are near the end of the watershed, and Lakewood was able to acquire a lot of water from the Abitibi mill, but they're going to pump it out of Lakewood's aquifers. And those are deep aquifers, and they're already getting a little touchy. According to a study done by in 2019 for the district, they said Lakewood Water District needs to monitor the levels of the aquifer to make sure they're not over pumping it, even though they have the rights to pump it. There's not good enough information to tell them the managers what are the trends. Are we sucking them down too much? And not only that, Lakewood has 4 agreements to take the Abitibi water and to sell it to 4 water purveyors upstream. So and they're going to pump it all the way out to Frederickson, and then use it, and then send it all the way back to the Chambers Creek water treatment plant, and then put it in Puget Sound. So they're moving this water around a lot, but I've not found anybody other than USGS that can tell you how long your groundwater is going to last, and can we successfully? Are we on the end? We're on the end, but what's going to happen if we suck down this aquifer further? This is a very, very big topic, and not many people are addressing it. But we're going to hopefully be able to tell you more about this with some more research and bring you some data, not just thoughts.
Yeah, who's responsible, Al? Is it all fall under the water district folks, or is there somebody else that needs to be involved in this? And if we're concerned, who do we go to get it fixed?
There is Pierce County, their planning commission last week just approved what they call the coordinated water supply plan. This is made up by a consulting firm down in Olympia, and they talked about who's going to draw water and where and how they're going to settle disputes and stuff. So this is a grand plan, kind of like the comp plan for the city of Lakewood. This tells you who's going to draw water, who isn't, and what's going to happen. They did not say anything about how much water they can suck out. Their plan is to suck everything out up to their water rights. And after that, you're out of luck. Then there's 13 other water purveyors within this plan, and they have a separate plan. So the Lakewood Water District has a 1,000-page water supply program and talks in detail about these things. And it includes the consultant's report about all 31 wells in Lakewood and how they're doing and how much money it's going to take to fix them. It's going to be very costly in the future here. Lakewood Water has 185 miles of pipe, and it costs $1 million a mile. So we got $185 million. The Lakewood's got to. Now, who's looking at it? The water purveyors are not looking at it. Department of Ecology is not looking at it. Only the USGS has been contracted to study this a little bit further, but they're the only ones gathering this data. Nobody is monitoring the well heights, and it's a serious problem that has grandiose complications. I'm sitting today at Lake Powell, Arizona. Their water is down over 100 feet and going down every year. And they're going to be suffering big time down here in Arizona. And I hope Washington, or our watershed, doesn't suffer the same way. But your answer is nobody is really monitoring this that I can find out.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, and Janet and Ricky, for your assistance in your presentation. We look forward to any upcoming information. Mr. Wagaman?
I didn't realize we're almost done. I have one other question, but it's about Stillicum Lake. Is there any, can they have time to answer one on that?
I'm sure. I don't know if any of them have the expertise, but sure.
What's your question?
Okay, when I drive across the Stillicum Bridge going in towards Lakewood, as you get to the other side, there was a big old, I think it was a big old cottonwood that fell into the lake a number of years ago, and it's sitting there rotting. And if you look to the left of where that is, that little spit of land out there, whoever has that home has done a lot of work. It looks very attractive now. The question is, did they work through with shoreline folks to make that look attractive? Did they do the right things? And does it make sense to pull those trees when they fall into the water? Does it to pull them out and clean it up, or is it better to leave it in the water?
So I will find out who they worked with. I can do that for you. And so we're talking about as you're heading west or east on that little bridge. What's when you get out?
East. I would say it would be east. You know, you're coming from short lane there, short lane and heading across.
Okay, I was thinking that's where you were talking about. So this bit of land. So just from an ecological standpoint, if you drop a tree in a shoreline like that, that's great because you get all kinds of habitat. Little things can grow on there and provide food for fish and stuff like that. It's not bad for the lake dropping a tree in it. We've already got Stillicum Lake's already got a lot of nutrients in it, and you guys are managing. I don't know if you're there, but they're managing it with herbicide treatments regularly as can be done. It's spring fed. There's springs all over the place. So a tree along the shore is actually, if you've got wake boats out there, that's going to help preserve that particular lakefront from the wave action. The waves come up. The waves start deep. When they come off those wake boats, they go deep and they push the sediment that's down there farther into the shore and stir it up. And so having a tree there is a natural barrier for that and can actually make it smoother, calmer, and maybe even a little fresher behind the log. So if they like it and they can stand it and don't worry about their boats, then it should probably ecologically stay there. But I'll find out who did it. You know, it looks good. I can see if I can find out from the lake manager because I know him.
Well, you know, I mean, from an aesthetic point of view, it certainly looks nice now. It's like a little park out there on that little finger of land. And so aesthetically, I look at that and say, wow, that's really nice. That looks beautiful. But then, you know, because of your briefing last year, I'm trying to be a little more conscious of some of those things. And so I'm going, oh, I wonder what they did. And it looks like there's some toolies there. So that seems to make sense. But you know, I just wondered how that worked. And
Yeah, I don't know why they did it, because I live on American Lake, and I don't know if they've got nutria problems or why the tree died. That would be interesting to know, if it just died because something chewed it all the way around.
well, it's been down for a long time. I would say it's at least 15 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
You know, it's been, and I've just been watching it kind of rot away, as you know, or decompose over time.
Yeah.
But, you know, and it's just like any cottonwood that's right on the shoreline. I mean, at certain points it gets so big and tall that when the wind hits it, it pushes it over. It just
Yeah, and it's probably putting up suckers all around it, new ones. So I would say it's doing fine.
okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks
Paul,
again.
Paul, wood is good. And we are constantly trying to help people keep wood in Clover Creek and Lakewood. We need it for a fish to hide under it. It helps the gravels rearrange. It gives shade. It keeps the heron from eating the fish. It produces bugs. A creek should look messy. You know, we aren't used to that. We think we should clean everything up and make it nice, but that's not the way Mother Nature wants it. And trees are made to fall into lakes and creeks and the Puget Sound. And some places you can't touch them, and you really shouldn't. Even though they don't look good, they're biologically excellent. And we had in Clover Creek this year, I got called twice by people, trees fell in, Fish and Wildlife got involved. They said, yeah, keep as much wood in that creek as you can. As long as we don't plug up a bridge someplace. You gotta be a little careful of that.
Yeah.
So remember, wood is good.
Great. Okay, thanks again. I appreciate it, Paul. Al, excuse me, Janet and Ricky, for your presentation. Look forward to next year or any other updates that you might have. Thanks again, and we'll turn it over, Ms. Spear, to Paul Buchitz.
Yes, our Public Works and Engineering Director is here tonight to bring you up to speed on some plans that the city is starting to form itself regarding some restoration activities in the coming years. So, Mr. Buchitz.
Thank you, Tiffany. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me tonight. I was going to go over at a high level the work that we're doing, going to be doing on Clover Creek. The first thing before I dive into, though, by a show of hands, how many of you have heard me talk or know about the recent flood study that we did on Clover Creek from JBLM down to Pack Highway towards Silicon Lake? Okay, so there's a few of you who have seen it. What I wanted to do real quick here is share my screen and just show for everybody the study that's been done and kind of set the stage for the rest of the conversation. So starting back in 2019, we hired a consultant to go out there and take a look at the flooding that was occurring in the Springbrook area, primarily because we believed, based on the level of detail and work that FEMA had done and the history out there on flooding, that we didn't feel that the mapping was accurate. We thought it was, in fact, overly conservative. So we hired a consultant who used a HSPF model, which is the same one that the USGS also with FEMA conducted for this area, all of Clover Creek, in fact. But there's different ways that you can analyze the flood flow going across an area. There's what's known as one-dimensional and two-dimensional. Two-dimensional is what we paid for, and it's a more robust and it's a more sound modeling methodology. So we went ahead and we had all the more recent topographic mapping that had been done by Pierce County that was not available to be used in the flood study by FEMA. The flood study by FEMA that's actually dated 2017 actually uses information and was created before 2010. So it's actually older data. The topographic mapping isn't as robust as what we were able to use. And real quick, I just want to show you, this was what the FEMA modeling showed. What you see in blue is what they call the effective 100-year floodplain. And the, I guess I want to call it yellowish orange color, is the 500-year floodplain. Now, FEMA regulates the 100-year floodplain, and they just have you notify or put on the maps that this is the 500-year floodplain, and they don't really worry about it too much. But when we did our analysis, our model, we determined that this is actually the 100-year floodplain. It's a bit of a significant difference. This is an overlay of FEMA's in the, I don't know what color, call it orange, overlaid underneath the blue. You can see there's areas where they were modeling flooding to have occurred, and our model is saying, no, there won't be any flooding. But there's also a whole bunch of area, which includes I-5, Bridgeport, Pack Highway, a lot of businesses, that our model says that should not be in the 500-year floodplain, that should be in the 100-year floodplain. So we actually talked with quite a few people. We spent time talking with FEMA. They analyzed our model and they said, yep, your model is good. We talked with Pierce County. We talked with the State Department of Transportation and a few others, Department of Ecology and a few others. And we shared this. We were basically asking them, tell us where we're wrong, because this is different results than what we expected. Something's not right here. Well, what we actually found out was that in the original model, even as not as robust as it was, the area up in here that they identified as the 500-year floodplain, it showed about a foot or less of water in the 100-year flood. But someone, and no one's willing to tell us who, made the determination that that was within the accuracy of the model. Therefore, we're going to call it the 500-year flood, not the 100-year flood. And the reason why that's important to know that, because it helped us understand that our model was in fact correct. It was not inaccurate. This is a depth map. And you can see on the right, the depth of inundation going all the way up to a little over 10 feet. And you can see that over the freeway, based on the color gradations, we have what's upwards to at one place between 2 and 3 feet of water across I-5. And then we have similar depths on the opposite side of I-5, the north side. We have deeper water within the Springbrook area. So this, as you can imagine, was a little disconcerting to us. This was not what we expected as far as the results, but the science proves it out. This is what it says. We did a comparison of what happened in 1996, because we all think that that was the biggest event, and it was the biggest event on record so far, but it wasn't a 100-year flood. It may have been a 100-year rainfall, or it may have been a 100-year rainfall on snow, which actually is really hard to quantify. And this is the level of flooding that occurred back in 1996 in this area. So when people tell us, well, it can't be that bad, I've never seen it that bad, my only answer, really my honest answer is, well, you just haven't been around long enough. You have not experienced a 100-year flood. So what are we doing about that? And that's where I'm here to talk to you a little bit more. Based on this work showing us that we've got a little bit of a problem out here, we have budgeted some money, $125,000 this year, to hire an engineering firm to come in and do a feasibility analysis. Tell us what our choices are as far as preventing the flooding, alleviating the flooding, reducing the flooding. Coupled with that, next year, we've got budget to do an analysis. I'm going to share my screen one more time. A stream restoration analysis study, starting from basically the railroad tracks, going downstream through the Springbrook area, and chasing the stream all the way down to the lake. And the idea here is not doing random acts of kindness, or as I call them, random projects of kindness, where it's really great, we want to go and do this little project right here, but we don't know what the real value is going to be to the whole system. We know that the city owns a parcel right across the creek from Springbrook Park that's going to be incorporated into the park, and it's going to be a benefit to everybody who uses this area. We also know that it's got a pond on there that was built years ago for different purposes. I've heard a lot of different stories. We know that there's invasive species not only on this property, but also all the way up and down the creek. As you heard Al say, the creek can be starved for large woody debris, which is very beneficial to aquatic organisms. Can help bring a creek back from near death, if you will. We have been talking with property owners right over here that own almost 5 acres adjacent to Clover Creek, and they're interested in working with us on something at this time. We know that there's a stormwater facility that floods out by the apartment complex. We know that there's vacant properties that are yet to be restored, and there's also trash and debris, and then we've got property owners down creek that also have done some streamside work, is the best way I can call it, that isn't necessarily beneficial to the aquatic environment. So the plan here is to walk up and down this, to get some stream restoration folks involved with us, to develop a long-term strategy for restoring Clover Creek from the railroad tracks down to Silicon Lake. So that when all said and done, we have a plan, we have a strategy, we have property owners who are involved with us, who understand what we like to do. Because sometimes the work you're going to do for a stream means you got to take out the concrete, means you got to take out the block walls, you've got to lay the slopes back, you've got to put some woody debris in the right way so that it doesn't actually cause you even more damage. There's been a lot of stream restoration work that I've seen in my career that has been more disastrous than beneficial. For those of you who don't know me, I spent most of my career working in water resources. I was the surface water manager for the city of Federal Way for 8.5 years. I worked for Pierce County Water Programs back in the 90s for 5.5 years. I've done a lot of work up in Bellevue and in the Seattle King County area. And I'm looking forward to bringing that expertise down here into our city of Lakewood to develop a long-term strategy for Clover Creek within the community itself. We have a lot we can do, but I want to do it in a thoughtful, strategic fashion moving forward. For the flooding issue, my intention is to hire the consultant and then to form an advisory committee, if you will. It's more of a stakeholders group where we have folks who are interested in stream restoration, a part of that. The Pierce County Conservation District want to be a part of it. I need Department of Ecology, Fish and Wildlife, Washington State Department of Transportation, Pierce County Surface Water Management, Pierce County government in general, because they own a big chunk of land out there. And then representatives from the property owners and the businesses out there to start talking about what is feasible, what isn't feasible from an engineering perspective to solve the flooding. And to be frank with you, I don't expect we're going to stop all the flooding. I don't think that's going to be something we're going to be able to effectively do, but we want to reduce it and stop it from going across the freeway and to protect and preserve as much of the land as possible. As a part of that, I expect that the one property that the city does own across from Springbrook Park with the pond on it to be a part of that strategy. I'd like to see that pond cleaned out. I'd like to see it restored. I'd like to see the invasive species on that property removed and native plantings put in around that pond so that the public can now come to it as a part of the park and learn about stormwater, learn about stream restoration, learn about what's the right thing to do when they live close by a shoreline, whether it be a lake or whether it be a stream, or if they're recreating. This is a great educational opportunity for us because it'll be tied in to Springbrook Park on the upper plateau, if you will. We're also going to be seeing a lot more development going on out there, and I'll use this as an opportunity to bring the lower income folks who currently live out there, give them a good recreational place and an opportunity to learn more about the natural environment. So that's kind of the meat of it. That's the crux of it and the thrust going forward. I will add one comment. There was a question about forming a similar district for taxing along the stream there. The reason why we were able to form a lake management district is because it's codified in RCW. We're allowed to do that. There's two types of districts you can form like that. One is a lake management district, and the other one is on the Puget Sound. It's a shore management district. I know about those because I formed lake managed districts in Federal Way and also did that in Lakewood. And then I was one of the individuals instrumental in getting the shoreline vegetation district in RCW. There is not one for streams. The challenge with that is these projects are not inexpensive. When you're doing stream restoration and you're doing an effective job, you're looking at $1 million per mile or more, depending upon the size of the stream. So it makes more sense for us to look for grants, to look for other funding opportunities, to use the Pierce County Flood District to help fund us, because we get, in the city, we get a percentage of that collection from the city ratepayers to that district that comes to us every year. So it'd be more sense to use that. Because of the nature of that creek downstream of Pack Highway, we're not going to have an endless supply of options available to us because people live there. We're going to be looking at things like taking out the hardened banks, putting in large woody debris, widening the channel if we need to, potentially raising some mini berms to keep from flooding the backyards, because part of the engineering solution may very well be to elevate the stream bank to the Springbrook area so that it doesn't spill over the banks. The downstream channel has the capacity to carry the flow, but it's spilling over before it can get there. Yep. That means we have to look at all the impacts. We just, whatever we do, we try to make sure that we're not moving the problem downstream. So we solve the flooding in one area, just to have it show up downstream. That's not good. That's not good practice for anybody. We can't do that. We won't do that. So that's in a nutshell. I will tell you that I'm in communication with Mary Dodsworth quite constantly on the work that they're doing for removing the invasive species for the Springbrook Park restoration work. I've encouraged them not to spend a whole bunch of money on the other property at this time until we do this engineering evaluation and we do the stream restoration study, because I have a feeling that park is going to be the property is going to be a significant part of whatever solution we come up with moving down there. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Mr. Wegeman?
Let's see. My question, come back to me, Don. It just slipped my little brain. Right.
No problem. Anyone else have a question? Sorry, Mr. Combs.
Yeah, real quick, Paul, and I apologize. I'm a little late in learning about what you've done in the past, but I appreciate you going through this whole process and bringing us up to speed. What it sounds like there's funds available through grants and other means that wouldn't necessarily be through the taxing or self-taxing or districts. But my concern was, can we get to it? And two, from what you said earlier, I was concerned that maybe no matter what we did, it wasn't going to help. Could you just talk about that? And is it worth the effort to put all this money into this if it's not really going to? And I guess what I'm saying is I'm hopeful that there is more change and that it can affect something, but let me know.
Yeah, well, let me talk about the funding thing first. First off, this type of work can be funded by the surface water utility in the city of Lakewood. So that is one funding source. Typically, stream restoration projects, though they can be very expensive, they can also be smaller in nature. I didn't mean to scare you off, but I want to be realistic about the cost of these. If you're doing a really large project and you're asking for private property owners to fund it, you have a very low probability, almost none, of getting them to agree to it. Right. I've dealt with this for over 30 years, and the reality of it is people won't fund it because they view it as other people's problems. Because they didn't generate the water. They just happen to live on the stream or the lake that the problem is exhibiting itself from. There are funding sources out there. In prior incarnations and jobs, we've been successful getting those funds. But in order to do that, to do it effectively, you've got to be able to show the funding agency Number one, what is the problem? Do you have a reasonable solution? Is it going to be worth the bang for the buck? That's why I say that for this stream in here, we really need to go in there and assess what we're dealing with. We need to figure out what the realistic potential is. I know that there's some barriers in there that we're going to take a close look at. Should those barriers be removed? You've got some, in the past, there have been some concrete dam removals. If there's more in there, I think there's another one in there, if I'm remembering correctly. It probably, the better practice, rather than putting a fish ladder in, those have problems. As I heard someone say before, they plug up, and then you're looking around saying, well, who's gonna take care of it? They're a maintenance headache. What's better is you rip them out, you rip those structures out, and then you put in a boulder riffle. So it's a cascading boulder riffle that is there all the time. The fish migrate through naturally. A large woody debris or debris that gets caught in it, it diverts the water over to another part of the riffle or to the boulder cascade. The fish can get up through that. Fish are very resilient. They can really make things happen. What I also want to know is, are there areas in this stream that aren't just, the fish don't just use it to bypass to go upstream. But the fisheries biologists are going to tell us that. They're going to say this is primarily a corridor where fish are going to migrate through. So don't spend a lot of time looking for spawning gravels, okay? They may very well say that your best bet here is to make it so they can transport themselves through it, but look at rearing habitat. That's where that pond has a lot of promise. The problem with that pond right now is difficult for fish to get into and get out to. If they get into it, they get stranded, and it's a heat sink. They die in it because it doesn't have the shade. It doesn't have the depth necessary. So that's why I talk about, if we're going to look to dig that out and make it appropriate fish habitat, we want to find out what it's habitat for. So that means you got to have the vegetation around it to keep it cool, and you got to make it in such a way that it doesn't also become basically a let's call it a bird feeder. Okay, so the birds won't come in and just basically eat all the fry and the fish they're trying to rear. So they've got to have some place to hide. Janet was, she mentioned the fact that, you know, that large woody debris, those trees that fall, those aren't just necessary. Those are vital for fish habitat, right along the shoreline in the streams, because that's where the fish will hide from the predators. That's also where they decay and they live. They put their organics, and the bugs that eat the wood drop into the stream, become part of the food stream, the food source. That also means that the overstory over the stream for the trees and the shrubbery has to be the right kind, so that it's the food source for the bugs that will fall off. And then the macroinvertebrates who live in the stream will actually eat that, and then they become part of the food cycle for the fish, depending on what life cycle they're in as they're in the stream itself. So it's a complex cycle, but it's one that's fairly well understood now. I mean, we're always learning something new, but we got to take a look at what we have and figure out what's the best available use of that stream. What's realistic? What can we do? And that's what I'm looking to do with this study coming up next year, starting with that.
Great. Paul, you go ahead.
My brain cells came back finally, Don. Thanks. We talked about this a couple of years ago on when you start talking about the floodplain, and certainly with, you know, we don't want homes to be flooded. And since we're on the planning commission, we're trying to zone things to where people live. The other issue though is when we start charging the floodplain, we kind of make it tough for the real estate folks, because insurance rates change, because all of a sudden somebody's house is in a floodplain where it wasn't before. And so, you know, we got to make sure we're right. But the bottom line is we want to protect our citizens by doing the right thing to make sure that property doesn't get damaged in a flood if we can. And so I just be interested in more thoughts on that area.
So when it comes to a floodplain, I guess the question you have to ask yourself is it better not to know and be flooded, or better to know and have the insurance so when you are flooded, you're covered? One of the saddest things that occurred in my career was I had to deal with an older couple that lived in their home for 35 years. This is South Hill, Puyallup. And it was the February 1996 flood, the one that I showed you. South Hill, Puyallup. How far is it away from the river? I mean, hundreds of feet above it. They're not even close to the river. But what they didn't know was that their home was built in a kettle pothole. And the kettle pothole was actually one of a daisy chain series of kettle potholes. Theirs was on the bottom end. As the first one filled because of the rain on snow event, it overflowed, it went into the next one. And so on, and so on, and so on. And they talked to me, they had 6 feet of water in their home. That's damaging.
Yeah.
And they lived there 35 years. And they asked me, well, what happened? We've lived here 35 years. We've never seen flooding like this. And the only thing I could tell them was, you haven't lived here long enough, because this was going to happen. So the fact, and I know that I wasn't really very thrilled with the outcome of our flood analysis, because I expected a different result, I'll be frank with you. But what I didn't know was that someone had made decisions in the previous analysis that I wouldn't have agreed to, that resulted in a reduced boundary of the floodplain. Someone made a determination to draw a line right along the freeway and say, the flood doesn't go past this, when in fact it did. Okay. So all those businesses that are out there now in those homes, once we file with FEMA, they'll be in the floodplain. We are trying to find an engineering solution that will reduce the impact of that floodplain. And floodplains are good, don't get me wrong. Floodplains are very beneficial. They're basically the pressure relief valve on our natural ecosystems. But there is that balance where we want to take advantage of that land. We got to do it the right way. And when we encounter something like this that no one was aware of, we try and see if there's an engineering solution that will help prevent those people from being impacted. But the good news is that the city of Lakewood is a part of the National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP. So they can buy insurance that will protect them from flooding. And by the way, not very many people know, but the insurance, the NFIP flood insurance program, it's like an all hazards risk program. So that's how you get your earthquake insurance too. Mm-hmm. So you can buy it for a steep slope. You can buy it, it'll protect you for steep slope failure, for flooding failure, for earthquakes. So it's not a bad thing. What's bad is that when you are in deeper water and or you have repetitive losses, your insurance rates skyrocket, quite a bit, a couple $1,000s a year. And you got to make the choice of what's more important, where you're going to live, or having the insurance or not having insurance.
But you Paul, I mean, I appreciate that. So what it means is if that floodplain's moving, maybe it makes sense from a code or something where we make a taller foundation in some of those areas, so that those houses wouldn't necessarily be damaged, because you're talking a couple of feet on worst case in some of those places.
That's already part of our code. Mm-hmm. We have regulations complying with FEMA requirements for building in a floodplain, and it already requires an elevation a foot above the flood elevation. Interestingly enough, for a lot of this area, the aerial extents grew larger, but the depth in some areas reduced. So we actually have one area that essentially it would be almost unbuildable under the old mapping, but on the new mapping shows that there's a big circle hole in the middle that can be built. So we have a developer looking at that very closely right off of 123rd. It was the former Cloverbrook apartments that were going to go in. Now there's warehouses going to go in there. You can build in a floodplain. You just have to do it the right way.
Yeah, I know that for a fact. My son lives down in Chehalis, and his house is jacked up 8 feet on a foundation. And when we were saying, hey, what's the insurance going to be? When the insurance saw that what they had done, he didn't have any extra premium. So that was pretty interesting.
Yep, there's engineering standards that you apply to construction in the floodplain, and it reduces your insurance, because when you buy insurance, they're paying not for the land, they're paying for the structures. You protect the structure. There are designs for the stem walls that allow the water to flow underneath the structure and not get ponded in there. And so if you're applying those engineering standards, you won't have too much trouble. Now, mind you, they won't pay you if your car floods.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, Mr. Guerrero, you had a question? Whoop, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Just a quick follow-up on that. So you've determined the 100-year floodplain is different than FEMA's. You've shown it to FEMA. FEMA says, oh, that looks like you're correct. When would that actually go into effect? And
that's an excellent question. So in order to go into effect, we have to actually apply to FEMA for a map or a letter of map revision. We were starting into that process. And then FEMA said, oh, it looks like the water flows across the freeway, so you need to identify your floodway. And the floodway has historically always been down the creek.
Yeah.
The problem is that once you identify a floodway, it's really hard to get FEMA to back off of that. And that you cannot build in a floodway. And we didn't want to have the freeway in the floodway, frankly. That complicates things a lot. So we told FEMA, cancel our letter of map revision request. We want to do some engineering evaluation on this first to see if there's a way that we can alleviate this flooding. And that's where we are today.
Great. Any other questions for Paul? Seeing none at this time. Paul, thanks again for your presentation and information. I appreciate it. And
You're
all
welcome.
of you, again, thank you for everyone. Great. We'll move on, Ms. Spear, to the 2021 Comprehensive Plan amendments. And you're muted. Yep, there you go.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. We're now going to jump into a different topic. It's a continuation of the meeting discussion last month regarding the various 2021 comprehensive plan text or map amendments. We're going to pick up with those 5 or so that weren't discussed last time, but we're also going to be showing you, Dave Buer and I, an updated version of that new energy and climate change chapter. I am mindful of the time, and so this will be a high-level review, but please stop me if I'm going too fast or if you need more detail. So with that, I'll share my screen. So where we sit is last month, or 2 weeks ago, excuse me, you took a look at amendments 01, 02, 03, 05, 07, and 09. Not that that means very much. And then tonight, what we're going to do is talk about 4, 6, 8, and 10, and 11. And then again, go back to the first one, which is the energy and climate change chapter. The upcoming schedule is here for you to see. So in 2 weeks is the public hearing on all of the amendments. May 5th is when the commission is scheduled as of now to take action. And then May 10th is when the council is scheduled to begin their review. If for some reason the commission needs more time than that May 5th date, that will then shift what happens at the council. No problem at all. It's just a matter of when you take your action, it will then move on to the city council. So I'm going to jump right into a summary of what we've got for those remaining amendments that we didn't talk about last time. First of all, number 04 relates to adding some of the new encouraged, quote, missing middle housing, along with accessory dwelling unit encouragement and temporary or transitory accommodations. And I need to apologize, as you'll see here in red, there was a couple of sections of the proposed amendments inadvertently left out of tonight's meeting packet. So those will be provided in the next packet for sure for the public hearing, but I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as I go to each of those amendments. Number 06 relates to reflecting the fact in the comprehensive plan that you have 2 sub-area plans now, both the 2018 downtown sub-area plan and then the Lakewood Station sub-area plan, which is about to be acted upon by City Council. And then that number 6 was left out altogether again by accident. And so that'll be brought forward as part of the materials for the public hearing in 2 weeks. Number 10 is talking about expanding the list of water supply facilities within our code. This was basically a correction to the Title 18A that was adopted now I think almost 2 years ago by the city. Number 11 is talking about transitory accommodations, and also the term or the phrase religious organizations hosting of the homeless. This is an amendment to the Title 18A again to allow what's now required under the 2020 Bill 1754. And for all of these, the department is recommending approval. The last one we'll be talking about tonight is a little more complicated. This is actually a proposal to rezone a number of parcels in several different places within Tillicum, and also a recommendation ultimately to have over the next year or so a review of the 2011 Tillicum Neighborhood Plan, Center of Local Importance, and then a couple of sections within the Comprehensive Plan. As a result of just looking at the rezone request, this became apparent that this additional action would be needed. This is also one that is recommended for approval by the department. So getting into number 4, this is that new types of housing being encouraged. There is a list of the affordable housing programs, policies, and initiatives in place now, things that the city handles internally, but also partnerships that it has with outside agencies and organizations. There's some updated definitions per state statute. And then in 18A 4110, there's this allowance now of 2 and 3 family dwellings within the residential R1 to R4 zones, and multifamily being allowed within the mixed residential 1 and 2 zones. And both of these actions, along with other items within the rest of the amendment, are in response to state and regional, there we go, planning to encourage additional affordable housing within jurisdictions, and looking at what has been traditionally been single family zones and opening them up to other types of housing. By doing these last 2 things, however, there will be perhaps over time the increase in this different housing type within each one of those zones, but that's also going to be governed by the densities that are allowed within those zones. Those are not proposed to be changed at this point, but what you see along the bottom is the number of units per acre in R1 through R4, as well as MR1 and 2. So this section that was inadvertently left out of your materials for this evening, this is the discussion about allowing ADUs. What you see here is that, first of all, they conform to all applicable standards in code, but also that real property owners are not required to reside on site in either the primary residence or in the ADU. And the idea here is you are expanding the allowance for ADUs and the attractiveness of them for property owners, because up until this point, it has been a requirement that the owner of the property is either in the ADU or the primary residence.
Oh, really?
So yes, that is number 04.
Mm-hmm.
Number 6, this one was inadvertently left out altogether. My apologies to you. But this is really, it's non-substantive in that there's no new concepts here. What's going on is the comprehensive plan is simply being updated to reflect the fact that 2 sub-area plans will have been adopted by the time the comp plan cycle process completes with the city council. And there's a couple of things. So just saying that they've been adopted rather than the policy says encourage them to get adopted. Things like changing central business district references to downtown, since that's the new official name. Recognizing some of the development that originally was, again, this aspirational or targeted development projects, they've now been completed, and so that needs to be reflected in the comprehensive plan. And then there's some new facts and figures, population and employment growth within those sub areas getting updated based on the adoption of the plans. Number 8, again, is the most complicated one of these amendments this year. And this started as a private application for 3 parcels to be rezoned near the Berkeley interchange in Tillicum. And if you remember, this is one that actually has been submitted to the city since 2019. Originally, let's see if I've got this. Yes. Originally, there was an application done in 2019, but because the construction of the interchange hadn't yet begun, and there really wasn't a full understanding of where it would land, literally where it would be on the land and how it would affect surrounding parcels, the city decided it was not time to do this consideration, and so that was rejected. In 2020, the applicant reached out again to say, hey, where is the city at with this? Decided at that point not to submit at all, but they did submit for this year. This up here you'll see is obviously more than 3 parcels, and what has happened is the city has gone through and taken a look at the parcels around those 3, as well as around the now almost complete Berkeley interchange, and has recommendations here for a number of other parcels to also be rezoned to neighborhood commercial 2 in order to be a more logical progression of land uses between commercial and residential. Added to this application by the City Council in February of this year was an additional request to rezone 4 parcels in another part of Tillicum that are part of a Habitat for Humanity project. And this is something that's been in the works, not this project specifically, but the parcels have been part of a long-term abatement process by the city over the last 10 years or so. And this is just kind of coming to the end of that process. And the Habitat for Humanity support by the city and the partnership with the city over a long time was the impetus for the City Council to add this in. And then because of the review of both of these sets of parcels being rezoned, there's now arisen a need, or it's become very apparent, that the 2011 Tillicum Neighborhood Plan, the long-established Tillicum Center of Local Importance within the Comprehensive Plan, and then a couple of the sections and goals within the Comprehensive Plan also should be reviewed and updated with public input over the next year or so. So I already mentioned this. What you have related to the Berkeley interchange parcels as well is there's actually a recognition within the comprehensive plan as it is right now, increased economic activity in Tillicum, and that land use policy 51.1 says that the city should in fact provide for commercial and service uses for the needs of residents in Tillicum because it's a quote isolated area of the city. So where we're actually talking about is this is the area of the interchange. These 3 parcels up here in the corner were the ones originally requesting the rezone. But as the department was reviewing this, it made sense to also consider these other parcels for rezone in order to have a logical progression of zoning and land uses. This same map is depicted down here just on a parcel basis. So the yellow dots on the upper map are the same as the blue dots below. The idea here is that these parcels would all be rezoned to neighborhood commercial 2. And within your packet, there is a table that compares the allowed uses of the current zoning of R3 to that of neighborhood commercial 2. The Habitat for Humanity I mentioned just a moment ago is something that's part of a long-term partnership between the city and Habitat. The City Council actually approved a motion last October for a grant between the city, or a grant from the city to the Habitat for Humanity organization for 9 new affordable housing units. And the Habitat for Humanity has until mid of 2024, December, to complete the project. This project should have been included in the comprehensive plan docket last fall. It didn't happen because at that point there was 1 parcel in foreclosure, and so the Habitat for Humanity did not have possession of title. And so we are now coming forward to you after direction from council to drop this back into this amendment and recommend the rezone as well. This is a graphic of where those are located. It's part of a dangerous building abatement process, as I mentioned, that's been going on for about 10 years. And it's increasing density within the Tillicum to go from the 4 or 4 parcels, but maybe 2 structures with however many housing units to up to 9. The last part of this amendment is an update of, as I mentioned, the Tillicum Neighborhood Plan, Center for Local Importance, and then other comprehensive plan sections. This is a map that's currently in the comprehensive plan, and it talks about this urban design framework for Tillicum, and this is all the way back from 1999. Obviously, some time has gone by and some changes have happened. So re-examining this in terms of what has already been done within this area, but also reaching out to the public and finding out through a public outreach process what priorities and policies should be updated and be reflective of the public sentiment as well as city planning going forward. I think this is pretty much what I've already said. Number 10 is looking at an amendment to Lakewood's code. So rather than the comprehensive plan, we're now in the development code, and everything that's highlighted shows you changes where there are some additional water supply facilities being listed as permitted either outright or conditionally within the city at various zoning districts or zones, I should say. That's what all of these are across the top. And as I said, this is kind of a cleanup found since the adoption of the full rewrite of Title 18A. And then the final one is talking about religious organizations hosting of the homeless. This is something that got specific attention by the state legislature last year. And so engrossed substitute Senate Bill 1754 was then codified in 35A 21360 and says cities, you will allow this to happen. And these are some things that limit what a city can do in terms of restrictions upon a religious organization that wishes to host a homeless site. So this is just a list of the various sections within Title 18A that show amendments, and those are all within your packet for this evening. See if there's anything else I need to say about this. I don't think so, other than really what's going on here is reference to the state statute. So as time goes by, if the state legislature does change this program, the city's code wouldn't have to get amended necessarily. It would just be referring to the latest version of the state statute. So I'm going to stop sharing there before we get back to the energy and climate change chapter. Is there any questions for me maybe on the other ones so far?
Mr. Pearson, unmute yourself.
Yeah, I had a question about the time frame for the homeless with the church at the churches. So it talked about like 4-month kind of like permit cycles. Is that from the state law, or is that something that the city had put in, and could you shorten it, I guess, or could they get another one in 2 days and just kind of keep stacking them on so they're always there, or what's
any timeframes that you are seeing in this code amendment is coming from the state statute. And
Okay.
so the intent here is a policy decision by the state legislature to allow religious organizations to do this and to limit local government from saying, this is how you can do it, and we're going to restrict this maybe more than the state legislature would want them to. So yes, if you're reading a 4-month time frame or there's no limit in how often they do it, that's straight out of the program that was adopted per legislative action.
If I can add a little bit to that, this is basically a preemption of local regulation by the state. And yes, there is a time frame in which they can reapply for reuse. The other piece that I would also add is in the event that they wanted to work with the city, which they're not required to, we can enter into a cooperative agreement and develop our own conditions and standards.
Thank you, Mr. Larson.
Dave just answered my question.
Great.
Which was, will we be able to make certain that there are rules and guidelines for helping these folks help the folks, such that we don't have a bunch of trash and that the environment is regulated so as to not be harmful to the neighbors in the churches and everything, some things like that. But I think, Dave, you said that we're going to be free to create a regulation set that did that. So that was my question.
Only in the means that they wish to do so.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they can meet the minimum requirements and move forward.
Okay, it is what it is.
Mr. Guerrero.
Thank you. So is all that language directly from the state? I guess my question was, it's specifically talking about religious organizations helping homeless, and I'm curious if that's the only organization that actually is allowed to, by the way that's written.
It's the only organization that is described in that statutory section. So this is reacting to that bill and complying with it. The city could at some point allow other types of organizations or private property owners to host these as well. But as of right now, this is simply the religious organizations per state law that Lakewood is adding to its code.
I would also add that the state law is pretty broad in its definition of religious organization.
Yeah.
And generally, I would also say that what's keeping these from coming in, frankly, is that the religious organization has to provide for indemnification insurance.
Mm-hmm.
The city is indemnified from this operation entirely. And if religious organizations are having to meet the insurance requirements, I think in many ways, this is detracting from what the state is attempting to do.
Great.
Well, it certainly protects us.
Okay, Ms. Spear, I see no other questions.
All right, then what I'm going to do, Mr. Buer, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to walk through a quick review of what's been added to the energy and climate change chapter. And if there's anything that I miss or anything you want to elaborate on, jump in after me. Does that work?
Works for me.
Okay, here we go. So last month we talked about the energy and climate change chapter as it was drafted at the time. Since then, some additional information has been added in regarding specifically the greenhouse gas emissions information that Mr. Bureau was able to work with Google's Environmental Insights Explorer to add. This is a new program. It's something that's offered free of charge, but you have to just sign up and work with Google to get the information out of them. You'll see a description about this. That's also language within tonight's packet, but it's anonymous data combined with other data sources. And it's basically AI trying to figure out how people move around and the type of GHG emissions that might be as a result. So let's see. There was one other thing I wanted to say on this page. Sorry, one second. Nope, I'll get to it. Okay, so calculating the baseline was the first step. Within the GHG emissions, what the Google program works on is road transportation and commercial buildings and residential buildings, the two most important contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. So it's really based on building construction or building occupancy and then transportation systems. Within the transportation section, there's a little graphic here that explains how they come up with their results, but it's looking at transportation modes, types of fuel, age and efficiency of the vehicle fleet, total trips, and annual miles traveled. Relating to buildings, it's looking at combustion of fossil fuels, and indirectly the electricity the residents and equipment consumes. And so this is, again, both residential and commercial building data that was collected or analyzed. Long story short, looking at the information that came from Lakewood, calculation in 2019, about 639,000 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions was calculated. There is a discussion about a reduction annually in Lakewood based on rooftop solar potential. It's about 35% reduction, but that assumes, as it says here, that the panels would receive at least 75% of the maximum annual sun in the city. Whether that could be accomplished with the amount of trees in some of the areas of the city is another question. One of the other things that's discussed in the addition to the chapter is the projected, greenhouse gas targets, 45% below 1990 by 2030, which is a reduction of down to, 294,000 metric tons, 70% below 1990, 10 years later. So that's down to about 160,000 tons, and then 95% below by 2050. So dropping from that number you saw in 2019 of the 639,000 metric tons, coming all the way down to 26,750 by the year 2050 is the target per state statute. As stated here and in the chapter itself, this is going to be hard for the city to try to accomplish without a lot of extensive cooperation from the utilities that serve Lakewood's residents and businesses. I know Mr. Buer has expressed to the commission many times that the city is, quote, not full service, meaning it doesn't own power, water, sewer. Those are all agencies or utilities that work independent of the city itself. And so it's going to be a matter of working in cooperation with those entities in order to be successful to meet or come close to those targets identified in the statute. So I'm going to stop sharing again. And Mr. Buer, if you have anything else you wanted to add here.
Well, a couple of things. I don't want to take too much time this evening, but this came to my attention by accident that this program and software were available. I contacted Google and I said, could you include Lakewood? And I wasn't sure that they would because we're out of their general service area for this program, which has concentrated more on California and specifically Bay Area communities. The two that come to mind are Mountain View and Palo Alto. But all of a sudden, while I was on vacation, it came to my attention they did the analysis.
Oh,
And
great.
because they're using 2018 and 2019 data, it is much more accurate, in my opinion, than the estimates that we provided to the Planning Commission previously. So I think we're moving in the right track. I've also had some conversations with some other organizations. I'm not sure that the state can meet its numbers by the RCW referenced. There continues, in my opinion, to be some discussion on that. The other issue is the Google data is highly detailed. It's not in a format that I could share under our current circumstances using Zoom, but they actually have maps of every rooftop in the city of Lakewood. They have determined the square footage of all commercial and residential industrial areas. They've gone ahead and taken out all the pipes off the roof, off the chimneys and so forth, taken into account north-south orientation, and in addition, the number of solar panels you could place on your roof to determine that calculation. I was just floored with the level of detail that they were able to provide for the city of Lakewood. What you're seeing here is the first use of big data in Lakewood on solving long-term problems. And so as we move forward as a city, I think you're going to see more and more of this where you have this kind of analysis from which to make decisions. And so it's our first look at this in this manner. And with that, one more thing. You have a bunch of goals and objectives. I want to be very clear with the commission. What we're trying to do is line out an implementation plan in the future if this is something the council wants to do. One last thing, I just want to mention it. We also talk about the lakes in this plan, and they're shallow, and increases in temperature are going to affect the lakes. And I suspect that over time, the city is going to receive more requests for financial assistance on dealing with water quality in the lakes. And unless we can reduce the temperature, this is going to have a compounding effect on overall hazard mitigation within the city. And with that, thank you, Tiffany and commission members. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Fellow commissioners, you have any, Mr. Guerrero?
Just a couple things. So on page 70, and it was up on the screen there before too, it says, these target numbers are very aggressive. Lakewood's ability to meet these numbers is unlikely given the city's not full service, etc. I'm curious, why that statement's in there. I understand the idea that it's really a difficult challenge, but if we're going to set goals, I think we set them with the intent of making them. And so I'm curious why that kind of shows up in the plan.
It's a fair question. I will tell you that a lot of it has to do with the transportation modeling. In order to get down to those numbers, you're going to have to make some significant adjustments in how people drive. And you're going to have to get people out of their cars and using other forms of transportation. And I think that is going to be a difficult challenge. Now, the other thing that when that was written, I wasn't aware of exactly how much solar potential is in the city of Lakewood. It's possible that you could make a major dent in greenhouse gas emissions with the evolution of more solar panel and solar energy in the city of Lakewood. And in the revised draft, you have a significant discussion on the fact that solar energy is possible in Lakewood. But that we need to work this a little bit more, Mr. Guerrero. And it's something that I would like to kind of bring back to the commission after the public hearing in the aspect of additional policies and programs for solar panels. Because I'm beginning to get to the impression with all these large industrial warehouses and the like, this is a perfect opportunity to see if we can change the environment a little bit. And also something that you mentioned that's not been included in the draft policies so far has been pilot projects. I think there is definitely, looking at this information, a real feasibility in doing some pilot projects where potentially private commercial developers could maybe break even or actually make a little bit money on energy production. That's going to require some work with PSE, Tacoma Power, and Lakeview Light and Power.
Yep, great. Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. Go ahead.
I had one follow-up there on that same page. It's just, I think it's just a typo. It says, as provided in table 1 above, approximately 57% of the city's 2015 emissions came from residential and commercial and industrial built environments. I think the 57% is actually traffic, and the built environment it's 44%. So
yeah, that's an error. Yes, there's a couple of other small errors that need to be corrected.
Hey, Mr. Buer, this is Don Danielson. Relating to those solar panels, it's kind of ironic that I believe some solar panel companies are targeting Lakewood. I've been contacted. They must be using that Google mapping program to see the availability of possibilities. I've been contacted. I cannot tell you how many times that our house is a good candidate to put solar panels on. So it's kind of ironic we're talking about this subject.
Well, the Google data has not been made available to the public yet.
Okay.
But it soon will be. And I think a lot of the solar panel companies are going to be really surprised by this because there all of a sudden is a market. And I think we are the first city to actually demonstrate how this could work. And the math is really tight on this. I was amazed. We get into more of this and we're off of this whole process with Zoom. I'm more than happy to share the data.
Great.
But it's difficult to do in this format.
Sure. Mr. Larson, did you have a question?
I would sure like to be able to sit down and see, touch, and feel this study, Dave. I'm just enthralled by the fact that you got it. I think, great job. and that the data could be so substantial. We could be ahead of the curve in terms of getting solar on the rooftops of the industrial buildings in our city.
Mm-hmm.
What a heck of a great start.
Part of this whole process is to get us in front of upcoming changes in state law. And thus by doing so places us in a good spot for future grants. Mm-hmm. So that's a part of the madness behind doing a lot of this. Cool. And it is madness right now.
I get it. You got to start somewhere.
Right. Thank you. Okay, any other questions for Ms. Spear or Mr. Buer?
None for me.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We'll go now to some reports. Welcome, Mr. Boki, Council Member Boki. Do you have any reports for us?
I don't. I realize it's late, so I'll just tell you. We had the public comment on the Lakewood Station District plan on Monday night, so that was the first time we got to look at that, and so we'll be working on that. So we'll just, and Mr. Guerrero presented.
All right. His transportation issues related to cars, and
he did a very nice job.
Good job. Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. Ms. Spear, do we have anything else is importance?
No, just to let you know that we are continuing on our 2-week cycle here for the next few months. Okay. So in 2 weeks, you'll have your public hearing on this issue, and then we'll get into May, where you'll be eventually taking action, maybe on the 5th of May. And then after that, we'll be looking at the annual development regulation cycle, believe it or not. And then after that, we may have some time off. We will have some time off in the summer, as we have in years past. Come after June 30th, depending on what's going on with COVID restrictions, we may get to a point of partial or fully back in person, but we'll see how that unfolds over the next couple of months. I'll keep you up to speed. But that's it, Mr. Chair. Great. Before we adjourn real fast, I want to welcome Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Lynn Larson. We finally have a full slate of commissioners, 7 of us, which we haven't had for a long time, but we welcome Mr. Larson. If you want to say a few words about you and your profession, or, and why you chose to join this esteemed committee, go ahead.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to contribute, and was talking to Mayor Anderson and asked him how, and he said there was an opportunity here, and so I said, let's try to jump in. I've got this is my 47th year in the industrial and commercial real estate business. I grew up in Lakewood, worked my way through high school and college building houses here. Just live on Clover Creek, as I said earlier, and look forward to contributing to the betterment of the city. And I think it's going the right direction. I look forward to helping to continue to guide it.
Great. Well, we welcome you, and we thank you for your service and your commitment. It's a tough group, and I tell you. So, okay. Does anyone else have anything for the good, Mr. Wagaman?
We'll be Zoom on the 21st. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'm going to be in Washington, D.C., so I'm pretty sure I'll be able to Zoom in from there. But I'm not going to be local.
Okay, so that's brings up a good question, is for fellow commissioners, since we our next meeting you're saying next meeting is not the public hearing, correct?
It actually is, yes.
Okay.
April 21st, yes.
Okay, so it is next meeting. So if those can't attend, please let the staff know as soon as possible, so that way we make sure we have a quorum, and then we have to reschedule. But if you have any conflicts, please let staff know as soon as possible so we can reschedule if necessary. With hearing or seeing no others, we will call the meeting adjourned. Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Good night. Have a great week.
All right.